So remember that Saudi Arabia is a country where tradition is deeply entrenched and deeply valued. But I want to talk about Saudi Arabia and the Arab Spring in two contexts. First, domestically. You may have noticed that not much happened in Saudi Arabia during the Arab Spring. How come Saudi Arabia escaped pretty much unscathed? Well, there were a lot of reasons. One of which is that, let me just list some of them. First, King Abdullah is personally popular. Unlike, let's say, the president of Tunisia or Hosni Mubarak. The king is this avuncular figure who is perceived as not corrupt and who has essentially enlarged the personal space around individuals. Second, the Al Saud rulers, the House of Saud, are widely recognized as the legitimate rulers of the country. That is to say, they are not usurpers, they did not seize power in a coup, and they were not installed by the CIA or the British. They built this country, and it took them more than 200 years, right? And so no one questions that the Al Saud run the country, okay, and that they're entitled to run it. The question is, how do they run it and for whose benefit? The religious authorities, who still command enormous respect among the Saudi population, were unequivocal in stating that those kinds of demonstrations that they were seeing on TV around the Arab world, that they were watching on Al Jazeera, were un-Islamic and contrary to God's will, so don't do that. And people obeyed them. The fact is that for young go-getters, for energetic young people, economic opportunities do exist. Not enough, maybe not as much as they need, but certainly vastly more than existed in Tunisia, Egypt, or Syria. By coincidence, I happened to be in Tunisia a few weeks before the events began there, and I was really depressed by what I saw, which basically was everywhere you look, groups of men with nothing to do. Tunisia was completely stagnant economically, politically, and almost spiritually. Right? Saudi Arabia is not like that. The king, of course, bought a lot of esteem by handing out more than $100 billion worth of assorted goodies to the population. Salaries, unemployment benefits, jobs, housing benefits, right? He covered a lot of bases with that, and the price of oil made it possible for Saudi Arabia to do that without busting the budget. The Saudi armed forces are and have been, since the 1940s, firmly apolitical and generally stay out of politics. There was no cadre of restive officers just looking for an opportunity to rise in rebellion. So the loyalty of the armed forces was never in question. And the Al Saud, through marriage and economic ties and business partnerships, are very closely aligned with the wealthy business establishment of Saudi Arabia. There are a dozen or so prominent families in Saudi Arabia who have made their fortunes in the system, not in opposition to the system, and who are closely aligned with the royal family, and they support the royal family. And finally, I would argue that the people of Saudi Arabia were not in the mood for an uprising in the streets, because from 2003 to 2008, they went through a very painful period of shootouts in the streets and insecurity because of the uprising by Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And they didn't like it. So they didn't want to do that.